In this lesson, we're going to go over the element actions in your workflow section. We're not going to talk about payment or analytics because these lists of actions really only become available once you have installed plugins that offer those actions. I will recommend that if you are using, if you want to integrate with a payment gateway of any kind, I highly recommend Stripe. It's very user-friendly for integrating with applications, even over PayPal. If you are able to, I do recommend going with that. And once you install Bubbles Stripe plugin, all of the actions related to that plugin will show up here in this list here. Everything from charging a user, updating a credit card, creating a new subscription, canceling subscriptions, all of those things will be listed out here. Same for analytics. There are some plugins for Google Analytics, Mixpanel. If there are any plugin or actions that are related to those, they will show up here as well. But we're going to talk about element actions. This is another big section that will let you really change the behavior of your page and create a lot more interactivity type of behavior. Users can click on things to show and hide elements on the page. They can change the data sources of groups and repeating groups. And generally anything that will interact with the user as far as inputs goes and visibility, this is where you'll want to work with to make those things happen. So again, this is another section where depending on what you have on the page, you'll see more actions show up. I'm going to go ahead and add a few more things. We're just going to leave my submit button there so that we can see some more common options that will show up in that list. So I'll add a regular input. I will also add a drop down. We're going to add a checkbox, and let's do a map on my page, and we're going to add a repeating group as well. Okay, so one example actually of an element action that shows up here because the element is on the page was this alert that we've already been working with. This is only available here because I have an alert message element designed on my page. If this was not there, then I would not have that option. Makes it actually easier for me to know what I can and cannot do and not, continually run into errors if it's just not a possibility. So let's start at the top here. These first 6 will always be available because these are more generic ones. Showing and hiding is exactly what, they say. You're going to show an element or hide an element. Regardless of the default visibility of that element on the page, showing or hiding an element in the workflow will always override that default. So if an element is not visible by default and then you show it through a workflow, it will become visible. And then you will need to hide it with another workflow with that specific hide action. So let's just take a couple of examples here. I've got a pop-up on my page that is, pop-ups are by nature going to be not visible when you load the page. So we know that it won't show unless I show it through a workflow. So let's just do an example here. If I click this button, submit, to start my workflow off, I will go to element actions and then show and then pop up. Okay, so we'll do really simple one here. I'm going to refresh the page. And I do not see the pop-up because by nature it's just not going to display until I tell it to in a workflow. So I'll click submit. And there's my pop-up. Very easy. Same thing for hiding an element. So let's say in my pop-up, I have an icon, which is a little X. Here, I just typed in the word close to search for this X. And this X will trigger hiding the pop-up. So I'll start and edit a workflow from this icon, and that will run the hide action to hide the pop-up. Okay, so let's refresh the page to see both of them working one after the other. So submit will open the pop-up, and clicking on the X will hide the pop-up. Very easy to do. Show and hide, that's all it does. Toggle will toggle the visibility of an element in either direction. So if an element is visible, toggling will hide it. If an element is already hidden, then toggle will show it. Okay, so let's do this with my submit button again, and I'm just going to have a regular group here, and I'm just going to change the color of the background so we can see it. So we're going to very simply toggle the visibility of this group when I click the submit button. So we'll start edit a workflow. I'm going to remove this show action. Instead, I'm going to replace it with my element action of toggle. So there's nothing to set up. Oh, no, actually, there is. You have to select the element that you want to toggle, because we could be toggling anything. So we need to be very specific here. But then that's all we need to do. There's nothing else to set up there. So the group, my red group, is what I'm working with. So I'm going to refresh the page. And if I click submit, you can see it goes away. If I click it again, it comes back. So I'm just toggling that visibility. So that's useful when you're not sure if the element is going to be visible or not visible to begin with. And there are cases where that might happen, because you might have conditions on the element that might change its visibility. And those conditions might be dynamic, where you really can't anticipate what the default is going to be. And so then toggling it will just reverse the visibility from whatever state it's currently at. So that's useful because show and hide are more static. You kind of have to assume that, an element is hidden in order to show it, and vice versa. Animate is pretty fun. This actually lets you create some nice little animations to show and hide your elements. This is another version of showing and hiding, but you can do it kind of with style here. So let's take our group element to animate it. And for the most part, the majority of these actions are for showing and hiding. And you can see the different transitions will be labeled as transitioning in or transitioning out. And the type of transition is also in the label here. If you hover over it a little bit, you can see a preview of the transition. So for example, flip Y in will mean I'll do it again here, will mean the group will flip in kind of vertically up to down, and then flipping out will mean it will hide, flipping in the opposite direction. And as I would say, just preview these things and test out and see what's going to work best for you. You have a handful of options here to really enhance the look of these elements. Some of them are more subtle than others too. I tend to like the slide animations. They're pretty subtle, but still make a difference. And then also the fade in and fade out. The call out animations do not show or hide the element. They simply give them a little shake kind of thing. They bounce or they shake or they flash just to kind of get the user's attention, but they do not make the element go away or appear. It's just to kind of make them move a little bit for a short amount of time. In fact, when you choose, let's say I choose this shake one, you can define a custom duration. There is a default that gets applied. It's not too long. So if you want it to go on for a little bit longer, I would say check that duration box and define your own duration. This is listed in milliseconds. So just as an example here, let's fade the group out. I'm going to do the default duration. And just to have them both in the same workflow, I'm going to add a pause before I fade it back in. So I'm just going to add a 2.5 second pause and then another animation. This is under my element actions, of course, animate the group back in to fade in. There we go. So the first one fades out. Second one fades in after our pause. So let's check this out. And this is being triggered after I click this button. So nothing yet. Now I'll click it. So there we go. It fades out. We're paused and then it fades back in. Lots of different reasons why you want to animate. It's really just kind of to enhance the look of your elements here. There's nothing going on with the database or anything. We're just working with element appearance. Scroll to will scroll to a specific position on your page. So I'm going to remove these so we can see how that works. And you can choose the elements that you want to scroll to. So for example, if I have some text down here at the bottom, let's say hello world, like that. And when I click this button, I want my entire page to scroll all the way down there. That's what this action will do for me. So I will choose that element. You can see you have a list of all of your available elements to choose from. Hello world. And if I wanted to offset it a little bit, I can also add in an offset in number of pixels. So if I don't want it to go exactly right to the edge of that element, but maybe 100 pixels away from it, I can choose an offset. But let's take a look at the default behavior here. So there's my text down there, closer to the bottom of the page. If I hit submit, let's see. Let me lengthen the page actually, because my page isn't very tall to begin with. So it really just took me to the very bottom, which wasn't very much of a movement. I'm just going to increase the height of my page. So if I want to do that, I'll select the page from the top here of my element drop-down list. Your page is always going to be at the top. Or if I was selected on some other element like the text, I can just double click on anywhere on the page that obviously isn't another element. And I can scroll, pull up the same property editor. Now I'm going to increase the height of this page to something much taller, like 2000 pixels. So I can see a more dramatic scroll happening when I click this button. So we'll start at the top. I'll click submit. And you can see what just happened there. We scrolled all the way down, and the very top edge of the element is at the very top edge of my scrolling position. So if I wanted to offset it to maybe give myself a little bit more breathing room and maybe have it scroll to that position there, I can still use the text as a reference, but move a few pixels away from it in the end. Okay, so that is the scrolling action. The next one is setting a custom state. Now I'm actually going to go over custom states in a separate lesson because this is one of those completely blank state customizable features that can be used in lots of different ways, let you do a lot of different things in Bubble. So we're going to have a lesson dedicated to that on its own. So I'm going to move on to the next set of actions here. And that is our input actions. Now, these are only here because I have the input. I have at least one input on my page. I have two right now. Actually, I have three. I have this single line input. I have the drop down, and I have a checkbox. These are all considered input elements. The first one here, set focus, is for any input that a user can type into or even select. So all of the ones that we have here actually are applicable for this particular action. So setting focus in a single line input like our input A, which is this one out here, is basically just going to put the cursor inside of the input so you can immediately start typing, and the user does not need to click into the input in order to start typing. I will show you as I refresh the page. Of course, this is currently being triggered by the submit button, so we'll see what that looks like. Let me go to the top. So if I click, you can see that the cursor is not in the input, which means the input is not focused at the moment. If I hit submit, now we can see it is focused. In fact, the style that is applied to this input is also responding to that focused state. When this input is focused, we're going to put a border of this blue color around it. So it's really obvious to the user that they can start typing away. If I go over to the input and we check out the style that is applied to this input, I'm going to edit it and then go to the conditions for this style. I can see this is exactly what just happened. When this input is focused, the border styling will change. Okay, so that is setting focus to an input. That also works for checkboxes and drop-downs. It'll just basically make it active, and the user can start interacting with it with their keyboard. So they could use their arrow keys if they wanted to move up and down a drop-down list, or hit enter if they wanted to check a box, something like that. Okay, so the next item here is resetting inputs. This applies to any input values that are being used in a workflow. If they're being used in a workflow, when you run this action, they will be cleared out. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to move these things down. Actually, I'm going to get rid of I'm just going to use the single line We'll put this here. And we'll do this. So let's say that this submit button is going to update the current user's first name. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do in this workflow, I'm just going to insert an action there, is make a change to the current user. And the change I'm making is to the first name. All right, so the first name is going to equal the value of this particular input. So now that this input is being used in this workflow, resetting Bubble will know that there is an input to reset. Notice that there's nothing to actually set up here. It's just going to look for any inputs that were used in the workflow, and it's going to reset it. Resetting an input means returning it to its default state. Okay, now its default state right now is just blank. I do not have initial content set to this input. If you recall, initial content refers to any pre-filled value that I want the input to show as soon as I load the page. So let's say that the initial content for this input is Samantha, just kind of a random name here. Okay, now I've typed this in static. It can also be a dynamic value, but once I type over it when I run the page, which I'm going to do now, let's do that. So there's my pre-fill value. Once I type over it, let's say Henrietta, this input is no longer in its default state because I've replaced that initial content, okay? But by clicking submit and running this action to involve this value, and resetting it to the initial state, it's going to, number one, make the change to my user record because I've set that up, but also it's going to remove this value and return it back to the initial content, which was Samantha. So I'm going to hit submit so we can see that happen. There we go. Very quick. Normally, you'll want to use this if you want to clear out inputs to make it very clear to the user that they've submitted a form or something like that. So having it go back to blank is probably going to be more common, but there are lots of reasons why you would want to reset inputs back to their initial state and remove anything that the user might have typed in to override it. So let's do this again. I'm just going to do another name, Sally, like that, and submit. And you can see that it returned back to my blank value. I do see my placeholder, but that's not a value. It's just my instruction text there. And since we're here, let's just go to our app data and check my updated name did get updated there. I did not tell Bubble to update my full name because these are two completely separate fields. Bubble has no idea that they're related to each other. So if I wanted to update my full name, at the same time as updating my first name, I would have had to do this: full name equals input A's value, and then a space, and then this user's, or I guess current user, either way works. We're still updating the same record, last name. Because if I'm not updating the last name, then I know the last name's already saved to the database. And that way I can update both fields at the same time. So let's just do that since we're here so we can see what that looks like. So I'm going to change my name to Maria and submit. Okay, so now I should actually have my first and full name updated. I'm going to refresh this. There we go, Maria Roman. Excellent. Okay, so the next element action in this list is a group action: display data and reset data. So the reset data is the same concept. You return the group's data source to its default state. Now let's look at a group here. So here's a group. So when we talked about the group element a few lessons ago, I pointed out that your group can act as a shortcut to some record in your database. And we'll actually go through this example even more in an upcoming lesson about passing data to groups. But essentially, the group can reference a specific record. You would need to set the type of content, let's say, for example, user, and then the data source, let's say, for example, current user. Okay, and that way, inside of the group, I can have elements that refer to that record that the group is linked to. So let me change the background color just a little bit so we can see things better. So this text, for example, inside can say with a dynamic expression, the parent group's user's first name. Okay, so by default, I am automatically having this group reference the current user just upon page load. No workflow is necessary. So I'm going to refresh the page so we can see that happen. And there the name comes in. Now, if I want to change the user that this group is referring to, that is what my workflow action is for. I'm going to move this button back out here. Okay, so let's say when I click submit, I'm going to remove these actions. We run the display data. This replaces that data source in the group to something else. So you can change the data source. So I'm going to select my element. This is the display data action. Group user is my element, and the data to display, instead of my default user, which is the current user, I'm going to change it to some other user. We'll do a search for users. And let's just grab the last user in the list, which should be john@test.com. So I'm going to refresh the page. And so here is the default user, and I'll hit submit. And we can see the name changed because I changed the source of the group. Through the workflow, it overrides whatever I set up here as the data source. That is exactly what this workflow action is for. It's for changing that data source. Okay, and then the reset data is exactly like the reset inputs, except we are just resetting the data source of the group as opposed to resetting the default value of an input. So resetting would just return it back to the current user in this case. So for repeating group, we've actually looked at some of these actions in a previous lesson, but I'll go through them again pretty quickly. Display list is the exact same as display data, but it is for the default source of the repeating group. Repeating groups are specifically for working with list values so that it can display a list of items, whereas the group just works with a single item. So having the display list action will let you change the data source, change that list for the repeating group. Show next and show previous will go to the next page of items, the next set, or the previous set if your repeating group is set up with a fixed layout style. So here's my repeating group. These actions would not apply if you're in a vertical scroll or an extended vertical scrolling. It would also not apply under full list. It really only applies for fixed number of cells. It wouldn't apply for horizontal either, because fixed number of cells is meant to show a specific number of items at one time. And then you would have to run the show next or show previous actions to change that list to go to the next or previous page of items. Go to page will let you jump around because show next and show previous will go in order, whereas go to page, you indicate a page number to go to specific pages in that list. If you know you have 1,000 items and you're showing 10 items at a time, then you have 100 pages. So you can say, all right, jump to page 40, and you're going to see that list of 10. All right, clear list is exactly like reset inputs and reset data, but for the repeating group. This will simply take the repeating group's data source back to its default setup. Scroll to entry is specifically for the layout styles of vertical scrolling, extended vertical scrolling, full list, and horizontal scrolling. Basically anything that can be, where you can jump to an item, then that's what this action is for, and it will just navigate automatically. It'll move that list. It'll scroll automatically to a specific entry. This value that it's looking for, I'm going to go ahead and select it here. Let me select the type of content. Sorry. So let's say that this is showing a list of users. The entry to scroll to, it's not looking for a number. It's not looking for, item number 5 or number 6. It's actually looking for a specific user value. So I could say scroll to whichever cell contains the current user in this particular list of users. And if I did current user, then I am assuming that the current user will be in the list. Or I can do a search for a specific user. Let's just say the first item, and it'll scroll to whatever cell that the repeating group user has this user listed under. If you wanted to specify by a specific number in the list and not by a particular user, then you could reference the repeating group itself and take the repeating group's user list of users. Repeating group user, by the way, is just the name of the element. So I want to take that list of users and go specifically item number, and here you can enter in a number if you wanted. So go to item number 2, whoever it might be. Animating the scrolling will show the actual scrolling happening. If you leave this unchecked, it will kind of jump to that item instead. You can also offset the scroll position so that maybe there's a little bit more padding between the top of the scroll, the top of the repeating group element and the item that you have scrolled to. All right, so those are your repeating group actions. I've already talked about the alert action. It's really just to show that message. And then depending on what other elements you have on your page, you might have additional custom actions related to those plugins that have added other items. So the map, for example, has very specific actions for working with the map. You can have a button click or even the map click trigger actions such as adjusting the zoom of the map or displaying specific markers or even clearing out map markers. So I would recommend just playing around with these actions, seeing all of the options that are available to you to see how everything behaves. So for example, if I wanted to click this button and adjust the zoom, I can set the zoom manually to be centered on some location with some zoom level. Let's just choose 5 here and let's do some zip code. Okay, so we'll see how that looks when I click on the submit button. This is just an example of a very particular element action. I'm going to refresh the page here. There's my map. And let's do submit to see what happens. So it changed the zoom, it zoomed it out a bit and centered on that particular New York zip code that I added in there. You will see actions like this that are particular to specific elements, mostly with plugins that add elements to your page. The full calendar element is another good example. And yeah, anything else that you might add, definitely check this out to make sure you're not missing any additional functionality. And those are your element actions.